Hi, welcome back to another podcast of Life, the Universe, and Bowling. My name is Tom Seiler, and off we go to practice day two. I know that I'm slightly rev dominant from the last couple of sessions. Pretty close to matched up, but a little bit rev dominant. And I know I have a PAP that's 5.5 over and a half inch up. So now what? How does that help me strike more? Well, here's how. Rev dominant bowlers, I'm going to pick on them for a little bit just because I am slightly. They're going to see a carry rate that's normally slightly higher than speed dominant players. And if you're not, here's some things to look for. Is my surface $2 shiny? I don't know. Is my layout correct for my game? Riddle of the universe, right? Is my choice of where to play the lanes correct? That depends on a lot of things. Is my ball going through the pins correctly? I don't know. Let's explore each one independently, but understand that even though I'm going to talk about me a little bit because I am rev dominant, doesn't mean that if you're not rev dominant, if you're speed dominant, you can't take away information from this. It just means you might have to flip the table over in the other direction. So surface, let's talk about surface first. Speed dominant players can effectively use more surface, duller surfaces than rev dominant players. That's very important to understand. Speed dominant players can effectively use more surface than rev dominant players can. Likewise, rev dominant players can use shinier equipment a little bit more effectively than speed dominant players can. If the lanes are dead easy, anybody uses whatever they want, that's fine. But when they start to tighten up or get a little bit tougher, you really need to be matched correctly to get the look that you want. The key word in that sentence, and I said it a couple times on purpose, is effectively, right? I can throw dull stuff as a rev dominant player and I can hit the pocket all day long and I might shoot 650. Likewise, I can use too shiny a ball as a speed dominant player and also shoot 650. It doesn't mean I'm getting the best bang for my buck. It just means that I can be a decent bowler using the wrong stuff. Or my game is different. I only like to throw shiny balls. Or my game is different. I only like to throw dull balls. That's great. You can believe that, but you also have to believe that you're probably leaving something on the table at some point. So I'm as guilty as the next guy as a rev dominant player for using a little too much surface because it allows me to control the pocket. Controlling the pocket just means that I have a little bit more room to hit the 1-3. I don't, if I cut one a little short, miss a little left, throw one a little slow, I don't Greek church a big 4 when I'm throwing duller stuff. Likewise, though, I might flat 10 a lot. It might hurt my carry percentage because I'm throwing too dull of equipment sometimes. You may be surprised if you play around with different surfaces how you see the ball differently. And this really is more towards how is my ball going through the pins, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Likewise, if you're a speed dominant or matched up, practice with duller equipment or at least maintain your surfaces routinely so that you have a cleaner, diggier surface on the bowling ball. Duller balls smooth up surprisingly fast. We'll talk about this in the next podcast about surface maintenance. But for example, if you take a 2000 grit storm ball out of the box, throw 3 or 4 or 5 games on it, it might scan at 4,000. Motive might take a little longer to get there. Brunswick's kind of in between. But the point here is if you expect a 2000 grit reaction, don't take a ball that was 2000 grit sanded 20 games ago. You're not going to get it. There's a whole lot of stuff to cover in the surface maintenance section about why that is. But maintain your surfaces and practice with a little more surface or a little less surface than you normally use in league so that you understand situations where you might want to use more or less and see how they react on the lane and how they go through the pins. Is my layout correct for my game? This is a great topic. It's a subject that gets a lot of radio play. Layouts matter, though not as much as surface prep. cover composition, core strength. I would say that layouts are probably fourth or fifth down the line. Especially the angles in your layouts. Now, your pin to PAP distance is a pretty primary thing, but when you start talking about dual angle layouts and you start talking about how far do I want the mass bias this way or that way, and what angle do I want the drilling angle and angles to the VAL, those things are down the list a little bit. What I will say, though, is that I've created a chart. It's nothing new to me. I present it a little bit differently than most folks do, but I've created a chart for layouts in dual angle terms about angle sums. And that chart takes your rev rate and your ball speed. So it determines whether you're matched up or rev dominant or speed dominant. And it overlays that with angle sums that might benefit you. And essentially what an angle sum is, dual angle is notated in the first angle is the drilling angle. So you might have 90 by 5 by 30. 90 is the drilling angle, 30 is the angle to the VAL, 5 inches is the pin from the distance from the pin to the PAP. So that middle number is probably the most critical because it controls the amount of flare that the ball has. But honestly, beyond that, I look at the angle sums before I look at the angles individually. In angle sum terms, when you add the front and the back number together, so 90 by 5 by 30 would be 120. Angle sums for speed dominant players should be probably around 60 and not over 80. So a speed dominant player is never going to want a 70-degree drilling angle. It's not going to be as effective for them as other layouts. Angle sums for rev dominant players should be 120 or more. That's a big gap. That's a big difference from 80, right? But most likely, if you're rev dominant, you don't want it to be under 100. So you start to see very, very different ball layout techniques for rev dominant players versus speed dominant players. For matched up, if you're in the middle, angle sums can range from like 70 on the low end to 120 on the top end. You might even see some people looking for control drills go as much as 140, 150, 160. Angle ratios are a big factor. Not as big as the pin to PAP distance because we're not controlling flare there, but we're controlling when the ball flares and how much it flares in what part of the lane, which can really help with carry percentages. It can really help with how you see transition, etc. The guys that bowl on tour have this down to an absolute science. It's no longer an art form. It's not black magic. It's science. Ball manufacturers can vary widely too. For example, a 4-inch pin to PAP in Storm equipment for me rolls about the same as a 5-inch pin to PAP in Motive, right? So Motive balls, they're just torquier. They're a little stronger. They don't clear the mid lane as well as Storm does. So for me, if I want a similar reaction to a Motive ball, I need to drill about an inch stronger pin on a Storm ball, and vice versa. Pay attention to the trends there because they're not accidental. Different manufacturers have different characteristics, and you will find ball after ball, year after year, season after season, they'll have the same characteristics largely. Okay, lane play. I'm going through things kind of quickly here. This is a gem of a topic that I'm sure will get its own podcast or 10 in the future. There's no one right way to play the lanes. I will say, though, that a lot of people play them dead wrongly. I know grammar's not my greatest aspect when I'm doing these podcasts. There's always a ratio of oil on the lane. Normally on recreational patterns, we're going to see about 6-1. On challenge patterns, you're going to see 4-6, and sport patterns are 4 or less. But it's not so much about what the ratio is from the wettest to the driest board. It's about how much space that occupies to me. If that ratio is spread over a 6 or 8 board space on the lane, then the lanes are very blended left to right, and you can throw pretty much whatever you want to throw. Your speed matched up, rev dominant, doesn't matter. You have a lot of leeway. Let's put it that way. When that ratio, instead of having 6 to 8 boards between the wettest and driest area, when that ratio starts to get narrow, it's still a 6 or 8 to 1 ratio or 10 to 1 ratio. But now maybe it's only 2 or 3 or 4 boards that are between the wettest board on the lane and the driest board on the lane, left to right. Now all of a sudden you have a situation that we call cliffed. And cliffed means you've got a bunch of oil and then it falls off to nothing. So they're very wet dry. If you want to have your best opportunity in any situation, you must cross the cliff or cross the ratio left to right before the ball gets to the end of the pattern. So on a house pattern, this is 40 to 44 feet. Normally, a lot of sport patterns are going to publish the length of the pattern, but you want to make sure if you have ratio and you know where the ratio is, you want to cross that ratio from the wet to the dry before you get to the end of the pattern so that you still have a little extra oil to the left of your target down lane. When you give a good bowler a little bit of hold, they will absolutely murder them. That's the holy grail or the situation that you're looking for. It's not that you can't play in other places. It's just that playing in that place will give you the best opportunity to strike on an imperfect shot. And we all make those from time to time. I make them just about every time I go to the foul line. So the straighter you play on a ratio, especially on a cliff, the less opportunity you have to strike on an imperfect delivery, right? This is why straighter players need to throw stronger equipment when the lanes have ratio left to right. They need to ball up, get their feet into the middle of the lane, and cross that ratio a little bit faster with bigger equipment that has the opportunity to make the recovery. Some people think that higher rev players have an advantage on house conditions, on recreational conditions. I don't feel that's the case. I think the problem is that a lot of people that are straighter players or lower rev rate players just play the lanes too straight. There's a reason that bowling companies make bowling balls that hook off the planet. They're not for guys that have 8 million revs, though sometimes you see the pros throwing them anyway because they get paid to sell bowling balls. Those ball companies are making those bowling balls so that they can appeal to a wider variety of people. And if you have a lower rev rate, even if you're a little bit rev dominant, you may need to throw some stronger equipment, get your feet into the middle of the lane more, go across the pattern a little bit more, and have some trust in that ball to make a recovery. The place to learn this is in practice. I was at the center last night, and I have a friend of mine I've known him for 1,000 years, it feels like. He is a little bit rev challenged. He's a left-hander, but I drilled him a big ball. And I kept telling him to move into the middle of the lane, move your feet. He said, well, I'm striking. We'll keep moving your feet while I'm striking. And he was trapping the ball kind of right on the inside of the ratio. So if he made a good shot, he struck. If he made a bad shot, slow, missed it at the bottom, anything like that, the ball hooked on him. So I kept telling him, move in. Well, why? Have you seen one that didn't hook yet? No. Then keep moving in. Keep nudging in. Keep getting into the pattern a little bit more until you see the ball show you signs of getting tired or not making the corner. Now we have to be honest with ourselves. Did I throw it terribly? Yes. Okay. Skip that shot. Don't move off of it. Did I throw it good? Well, yeah, I threw it relatively good. Did it recover? Yeah, it recovered. Okay. Well, then you may have more room in to move because you haven't reached the limit of what that ball can do. You would probably be shocked if you take the practice attitude of, I'm going to take a bigger ball than I normally would take out, get lined up, ball up, move into the middle of the lane, and keep moving in until the ball puffs on you. You might be surprised how far you have to move and how much room that ball would give you if you would allow it to. So your ball must start in the heavier part of the oil and get across that ratio, left to right, across the cliff into the drier section of the lane before it gets to the end of the pattern. Read that 10 times before it gets to the end of the pattern. If you're not doing this, ball up and move your feet in. You might have to move your eyes out a little bit. That's okay, but ball up, move into the middle of the lane more, increase your launch angle, and find an area where the ball gets in the right kind of a roll. The game might get substantially easier. So this leads me to the last part of this conversation, which is what does it mean for the ball to go through the pins correctly? I hear that all the time. I hear pros talk about it all the time. I see it in magazines, all over the place. What does it mean to see the ball go through the pins correctly? Simply stated, quit looking at outcomes. Don't look at, did I put an X on the sheet or the screen? And start looking at how your ball goes off the back of the lane. Most people see the ball hit the pocket, the 1-2 or the 1-3, depending on their right or left-handed, and they start concentrating on, did it carry, stupid corner pin, am I throwing a scout? Meanwhile, their ball is telling them a lot of really good information, whether they struck or not, and they're not picking up on that. When I watch my ball enter the pocket, whether it finishes between the 8-9 or heavier on the 8 or heavier on the 9, watch where it hits the curtain when it goes off the back. Is it still rotating when it gets to the curtain? And is that rotation forward? Is it side rotation? All those things can tell you whether the ball is entering the pocket correctly. Is it driving through? Is it deflecting? Is it being overly aggressive? Right-handers that leave 9 pins, left-handers that leave 8 pins. Oh, I got screwed on that shot. Well, they probably scouted that 8 or 9 pin 3 of the last 5 shots. They're using way too much, surface or rev rate or whatever it is. They're attacking the pocket too aggressively, which also can be a problem. But they probably had 2 or 3 indications already that the ball was about to go by the 8 or 9 pin. If you understand how your ball goes through the pins, it gives you more adjustment warnings before you stop striking. It'll also help you understand if you need to move into the pattern to store more energy, or if you need to move away from the pattern into the friction more to get the ball more forward. And it helps keep you in tune shot to shot with what's going on and how transition is affecting the lane bend. Never walk away from a shot unless you are perfectly matched up, because that ball, as it goes through the pin deck, is telling you something. Everyone's a learning experience. When you practice, get lined up and comfortable, benchmark ball, then ball up and ball down so that you can see, even when the ball is still hitting the pocket, how much you had to move, how is it going through the pins, how many adjustments can I make into the pattern or out of the pattern before this ball starts to puff or this ball gets tired or overhooks or whatever it is. The worst thing you can do in practice is just throw strikes. You're not going to learn anything other than repetition at that point. So in recap, in practice, it's important to get loose and get lined up first. Ignore anything results-wise until you are. It's also important to build your confidence by striking and learning to get a good matchup on the lanes. But once you have that, experiment. Ball up, ball down, move around, change surfaces. See how all of those things look on the lane. So the next time you're lost in a league tournament, you might see a reaction that you've seen in practice and you already understand, well, this is too much ball, or it's burning up, or it's going through the pins incorrectly. That's a look that I don't like. I rolled a 2-pin, red flag. You either ball up or ball down, whatever it is. Maybe you rolled a 2-pin because it burned up. Maybe you rolled a 2-pin because it never hooked. But understanding that in practice will give you a better idea of which of those two it was, and gives you an opportunity to continue striking the next time you're in competitive play. So again, my name is Tom Seiler, Life, the Universe, and Bowling, and hopefully y'all have a good day.